The grand ballroom of Harcourt House glowed beneath chandeliers, their golden light dancing across the parquet floor. It was an evening of elegance, where London's elite sipped champagne and traded pleasantries tinged with subtle intrigue. Lady Elena Harcourt, the night's hostess, stood at the center, radiant in a midnight blue gown that shimmered with each graceful step. Her gatherings were legendary, attended only by those of influence. Colonel Henry Forsyth, a retired officer, with a rigid demeanor. Vivian Docks, an actress whose wit matched her beauty. Charles Endicott, a financier with a calculating gaze. Julian Mercer, a young journalist hungry for a story. The evening was flawless till the screen. At precisely 11 o'clock, a maid's piercing cry silenced the room. Lady Elena, she's dead. Gasps rippled through the guests as they surged toward the drawing room where Lady Elena had retired moments before. There she sat, motionless in her chair, hands resting on the armrests, a Venetian mask discarded on the table beside her. A spilled champagne flute stained the carpet gold. Her face held a faint look of surprise, no struggle, no wound, yet Lady Elena Harcourt was dead, somewhere among the polished charm and hidden motives. A murderer waited. Chapter 2. The arrival of Hercule Poirot next morning. A black motor car crunched onto the gravel drive of Harcourt House. Outstepped a man of meticulous precision, medium height, immaculate, in a tailored gray suit, patent leather shoes, gleaming despite the damp autumn air. His mustache was a work of art, each hair perfectly placed, his eyes missing nothing. Sir Hercule Poirot, the butler announced solemnly. Poirot inclined his head, stepping into the grand foyer with measured grace, followed by his loyal friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, whose face was somber. Superintendent Gough of Scotland Yard awaited them. Poirot, I had a feeling you'd be interested in this one. Mon ami Gough, Poirot said, clasping his hands. Murder, you see, has a certain lure. Hastings shuddered. Suppose you think it was murder. Then Poirot's eyes gleamed. Hastings, my friend, one does not simply expire at such an opportune a moment for intrigue. No, Lady Elena did not die by accident. The question is, who desired her death? Gough sighed. No forced entry, no struggle, no obvious cause of death. His doctor suspects poison, but nothing's conclusive. To guests from last night, a rouhari about. Let's go through this properly. He flipped open his notebook. Colonel Foray and Julia Mercer were in the billiards room. They confirmed each other's alibi. Indeed, Pooh murmured, unless they lie. Mara frowned. I assure you, Whitten Pooh moved on his gaze, falling on Charles. Endicott, and you, Miss Endicott. The financier adjusted his cuffs. I was on the terrace, taking some air alone. A pause. Yes, Endicott admitted. How convenient, Hastings muttered. Pooh's mustache twitched, but he said nothing instead. He turned to Vivian. And you, mademoiselle? Vivian gave a languid shrug. I was powdering my nose in the upstairs dressing room. The maid Annabelle saw Mathar. She can confirm it. Pooh nodded. Burrow and Lady Eleanor. When did you last see her? Vivian's expression turned thoughtful a little before. 10:30. She seemed anxious about something, distracted. Anxious. Pooh's eyes gleamed. She say, why? Vivian hesitated. She mentioned receiving a troubling letter earlier that day. A letter. Poirot sat forward. What kind of letter? I don't know. Vivian admitted. She only said a one. It was a warning. A ripple of unease passed through the room. A warning. Poirot exchanged a dank glance with Hastings before standing beside me. I believe it is time. Poirot examined Lady Elena's study. If such a letter exists, it may provide us with themes where we seek without another word. He led the way upstairs. Chapter 6. The warning letter, Hercule Poirot, led the way to Lady Eleanor's private study, a stately room lined with mahogany bookshelves and a quaint desk aft arc oak. The air held a faint trace of perfume mingling with the scent of old paper. An ink Superintendent G unlocked a desk drawer with a spare key found in Lady Eleanor's bedroom. Poirot examined Thackenton's carefully correspondence account ledgers and an elegant silver fountain pen. Then he found a single sheet of ivory-colored paper folded neatly, bearing only a few ominous words in bold inked strokes. "You know what you have done. There will be consequences." The message was unsigned. Hastings let out a low whistle. "Well, that's rather chilling, isn't it?" Poirot turned the paper over, examining the edges. The writing is deliberately vague, meant to frighten but not reveal too much. A threat, but one that allows Thesinder to remain hidden. Superintendent G took the letter roll, had the handwriting analyzed, but this doesn't tell us who sent it. No booty tells us something very important. Who, mused Lady Alana, was afraid infirmity is the greatest clue of all. It tells us that she had a secret one worth killing for. Hastings frowned, but what could Lady Elena have done to warrant such a warning? Pooh's gaze remained fixed on Thelator. That Hastings is the question we must answer, and have a feeling that among our esteemed guests, someone already knows the truth. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. "Come measure me. It is time to assure suspects about this mysterious warning." As Poole turned to leave, a gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a cold shiver through their room. Somewhere within Harcourt House, a murderer was waiting, and Poole was closing in chapter 7. The fear in their eyes. Poirot and Hastings turned to the sitting room, where the guests were waiting, some impatiently, others with a quiet tension in their expressions. Letter was still in Pooh's pocket, but its presence weighed heavily on his mind. He clasped his hands together and let his gaze travel over the room, pausing ever so slightly on each face. "Measure me. I must ask you all a very simple question," he said, his voice smooth yet firm. "Who among you sent this?" He held up the folded letter. A sharp intake of breath came from Vivian Dom. She murmured, "So it does exist." C.L. Endicott frowned. "What is that, a warning Miss Endicott delivered to Lady Lena Beffery? Her death? Someone in this room wanted to frighten her, or perhaps give her one last chance to right a past wrong." Pooh's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, did any of you receive a similar note?" A long silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, Julian Mara spoke. "I did." All heads turned it toward him. "You received a note like this?" Pooh asked. Mara hesitated, then nodded. "It wasn't exactly the same, but the meaning was clear. It was left on my desk at the newspaper office 3 days ago. It said some things should stay buried." Superintendent G stepped forward. "And you didn't think to mention this?" Poor Mercer exhaled. "I didn't think it was relevant. I assumed it was from a disgruntled source. Journalists get threats all the time." Poole studied him carefully, but now he'd think otherwise. Mercer's jaw tightened. "If Lady Elena received something similar, then yes, it can't be a coincidence." Hastings rubbed his chin. "Could this mean the murderer was trying to silence both of you? Or," Poirot interjected, "it means that both Lady Helena and Miss Mira knew something someone wanted." Tokeep, hidden his gaze, flickered between them all. "Tell me, what secret could link the two of you?" Mercer's expression darkened. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Pooh's mustache twitched. "Arm on me. Do not trouble yourself. I will find out for you." A nervous energy rippled through the room. Someone in this house had written those warnings. Someone in this house had killed Lady Helena, and P.U. on tended time masked them before they had the chance to strike again. Chapter 8. Shadows. Oft past. A tense silence followed Ellie's declaration. The fire in the sitting room flickered, casting long shadows across Couste, Flora, every suspect sat stiffly, their faces, care while composed, yet Poirot knew beneath the surface. There was fear. He turned his sharp gaze to Julian Mercer. Muir, you say you have no idea what connects you and Lady Elena, yet you are a journalist, a seeker of truth. Have you written anything recently that could explain this threat? Mercer hesitated, running a hand through his stark hair. I investigate many things. PUO, corruption, scandals. RPUO lifted a finger. Scandals. And tell me, did any of your recent articles involve our dear lady, Elena Mera? Exhaled. Not directly, but I was researching a case from 20 years ago. Something unfinished. A ripple of Una's passed through the room. Poole did not miss how Charles UT's fingers tightened against the arm of his chair, or how Vivian Dio looked away, and what precisely was this case. Poole pressed Mercer's jaw, tensed at his appearance. A young woman, Margaret Ashcombe, vanished without a trace. In 1905, she was a governor working for a wealthy family. The case was never solved, and he Ings murmured, and what does this have to do with Lady Elena? Mercer shook his head. I don't know, but 3 days ago, just before I received the warning note, I found something odd in the archives, a financial record. Lady Elena made a large withdrawal from her account just weeks before Margaret vanished, a sum large enough to be a payoff. Poole's eyes narrowed. A payoff, or a silence fee. A heavy stillness settled over the room. Then, a voice, low and deliberate, cut through the tension. You are playing a dangerous game, Mercer. All eyes turned to Charles Endicott. His usually smooth demeanor had hardened to Mercer. Scoffed. Is that a warning, Endicott? Endicott met his gate. Coolly, it is a fact. Some past's shoulder mean buried. Poole studied him keenly. Miss Endicott, but murder has a way of unearthing even the deepest of secrets, and I assure you, I will dig until I find the truth. For the first time, a flicker of something uncertainty, perhaps, crossed Endicott's face. Puo smiled lightly. Now, Miss Ami, I believe it is time we learn more about this missing woman, for somewhere in her story lies the key to Lady Eleanor's murder. The room remained silent, but Poirot knew the past had begun to stir, and Thecla was growing desperate. Chapter N. The Goat. Poe of Margaret Asham. A sense of unease settled over the room like a thick fog. Poole's declaration had cast a shadow upon the past one that certain individuals did not wish to illuminate it. Superintendent G. cleared his throat. This disappearance, Margaret Ashcombe, was it ever linked to Lady Elena? Before Julian Mercer shook his head. Officially, the case was cold, filed away as one of those unfortunate mysteries that never see resolution. He hesitated. But I have reason to believe Lady Elena knew something about it, and perhaps so does Charles Endicott. All heads turned to Endicott. He did not move, his expression carefully controlled. Ridiculous, he said evenly. I never met the woman in my life. Poe lifted an eyebrow. Ah, but Miss Endicott, you were a young man in London at that time, were you not? And your family was well connected to Lady Lena's. Endicott sailed sharply, but his composure did not waver. Many people were. Poole, press it forward. What if I told you that Margaret Asham did not vanish into thin air one tiff? She was silenced. Endicott's fingers twitched just slightly, but Poole cough motion to tell, a crack in the armor. Vivian D., who had remained silent until no, leaned forward. Moaner, Poole, you speak in riddles. What are you suggesting? Poole's gaze did not leave Endicott. I suggest, mademoiselle, that Margaret Asham knew something dangerous, and Lady Elena, for reasons we do not yet understand, paid to make that. Now let's to Piper. A heavy pause. Then from the doorway, a soft voice. That's because Margaret Ashcombe was my sister. All eyes snapped toward the entrance. A woman stood there, Annabel the maid. Her face was pale, but her expression was fierce. Ku turned toward her with quiet understanding. Mademoiselle, Yao knew. Annabelle nodded slowly. I came here under a false name. I wanted to know the truth. My sister worked for Lady Elena's family all those years ago. She wrote 2 morns, just once, saying she had discovered something terrible. She was afraid, and then she was gone. A shiver ran through the room. Po nodded, as if he had expected this. And you believed Lady Elena had a hand in it? Annabelle's voice wavered. I didn't know. I only knew that she was one of the least people to see my sister alive. Silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, Puyo spoke again, his tone like steel. Then I fear, Mademoiselle, that Lady Elena was killed because she too knew what happened to your sister. The pastors returned, and someone in this house is desperate to keep it buried. He turned his sharp gaze back to the guests. The question is, who? A hushful, but Pua saw it now. The glimmer of fear in certain eyes. Truth was close. Anso was the murderer. Chapter 10. A whisper in the dark. Annabelle stood in the doorway, her hands clenched at her sides. Though her voice had been steady, Pio noted the faint tremble in her posture, the weight of long buried grief now exposed under harsh light. Hastings cleared his throat. Sawyer sang. Lady Elena was one of the last people to see your sister before she vanished. But why would she have kept it a secret all these years? Annabelle's gaze flickered toward Charles Endicott before settling back on Pooh. I don't know, but I think she was afraid. Pooh tapped a finger against his chin. Fear is a powerful thing, mademoiselle, and it often tells us where the truth is hidden. He turned to Endicott. Monsieur, you were rather quick to dismiss any knowledge of Margaret Asham, yet I cannot help but notice that when Mademoiselle Annabelle spoke, you a paraduncetled. Endicott scoffed, but there was a tightness in his jaw. You're grasping at straws, Pooh. Even if I didn't know her, what of it? That was 20 years ago. What possible connection could it have to Lady Elena's murder? Quero steepled his fingers. Perhaps the connection lies not in Lady Elena herself, but in what she remembered. He turned to Julianne Mercer-Muir. In your research, did you uncover any link between Margaret Ashcombe and another member of this household? Mercer hesitated. Not directly, but there was a rumor at the time that she had been involved in an affair with a man of wealth and influence. The room fell silent. Puo let the words settle, then softly he asked, Misha, Kat, do you, Denis? Knowing Margaret Asham. Endicott's lips pressed into a thin line. I see what you're implying, Pooh, and I won't stand for it. If Lady Elena was murdered, he thought, nothing to do with a foolish affair from decades. Ehant mustached, witched. But you admit then that there was an affair? A flicker of realization passed through the room. Endicott's expression dark, as though he had walked into a trap before he could speak. A sudden noise startled them. All a crash, it came from the hallway. Pooh moved swiftly, lifting and opened the door of the corridor. It was empty, save for a single object lying on the floor, a silver candlestick. Hastings frowned. Could Simeon have been listening? Pooh picked up the candlestick, his fingers brushing over its cool surface. He turned back to the others. May we, Hastings, and I believe they heard far more than they wished. Too, he met the eyes of the guests, noting the tension no stretched toward in the air. Murderer is growing desperate, he murmured. And that Miami means we are closer to the truth than ever before. Chapter 11. The second shadow. A nervous hush fell over their room as Pooh carefully set the silver candlestick back on a nearby table. Someone had been eavesdropping. Someone who feared what had just been revealed. Superintendent G moved toward the door. I'll have my men search the house. If someone was listening, they may still be nearby. Pooh lifted a hand. Normally, they have already fled. But the real question is, what frightened them? Hastings furrowed his brow. Well, if I had to guess, I'd say it was Endicott's little confession. he turned to the man in question. You might not have been directly involved in Lady Alina's deathbed. You clearly have something to hide. Endicott's nostrils flared. This is absurd. I admit it to nothing except that I knew Margaret Ashcombe. That hardly makes a killer. Vivandio, who had been watching the exchange with cool detachment, suddenly leaned forward. And yet, you lied about knowing her just moments ago. Why the deception? Charles Endicott glared at her. It was none of your concern, but it was Lady Alina's concern. Wasn't it, Pua? Interjected smoothly. Shek knew something about Margaret's disappearance, perhaps even the identity of the man why I wished to keep her silent. Annabelle, still standing near the door, spoke with quiet intensity. If my sister was involved with a man of power, perhaps she was cast aside, and perhaps she learned something dangerous in the process. Pooh nodded, and Lady Alina, after all, these years may have discovered the truth. That is why she received a warning letter. That is why she was silenced. Julia Mercer exhaled, but there's still one thing. We don't know who wrote those warnings. Poole tapped his fingers together a hair. That is the puzzle, is it not? Let us consider, if Lady Alina had learned the truth, she would not keep it to herself. No, she would confront the unresponsible. A tense silence. Then, Hastings let out a gasp. Good heavens, Pooh, you don't mean to say she told her killer that she knew? Pooh's expression darkened. It would explain the urgency of the crime if Lady Alina had Merrill suspected something. The murderer might have found another way to silence her bat. She knew if she accused them, then they had no choice but to act quickly. Mercer finished grimly. Endicott's jaw tightened. And this is all speculation. Puo tilted his head perhaps, but speculation has a way of revealing truths when the right questions are asked. Just then, a soft creak echoed from the hallway. Puo turned sharply as to whispered. Was that Puo? Took a slow step forward. It appears, Masami, he murmured that our shadowy listener has returned for Chapter 12. A cry in the night. Creak in the hallway sent a ripple of tension through the room. Pooh held up a hand for silence, his sharp eyes flicking toward the doorway. The firelight flickered, casting restless shadows against the walls for a moment. Nothing moved. Then a sudden thud, a muffled gasp, the unmistakable scrape of hurried footsteps, polished wood. Hastings shot up from his seat. Pooh, someone's running. Before he could move. P, you old place to qui, old place to qui. Firm hand on his arm. No, mon ami, will not chase like hounds after a fox. The darkness is there. Ally, but our advantage lies in the mind superintendent to go. However, was already in motion, pushing past the others and rushing into the hallway. Stay here. I'll find whoever it was. His voice rang out with authority. Ash disappeared into the dim corridor. A heavy silence settled over the group. Pooh's gaze flicked between them, watching for reactions. Some appeared shaken. Annabelle's fingers clutched the hem of free dress, and Julian Mercer wiped his forehead. Yvonne Dio sipped her drink though. Her hands were unnaturally still. Charles Endicott, as always, maintained his composure, but Pooh had noted the way his lips had pressed together ever so slightly. At the sound of the fleeing footsteps, minutes ticked by. Then another sound, a distant cry, a man's voice. Sharp with alarm, Gu Hastings reacted first, dashing toward the hallway. Kuwal followed his footsteps, unhurried yet precise. They found the superintendent, standing rigid near the grand staircase's lantern, casting a pale glow over the wooden floor. His face was grim. At his feet lay a figure. A man collapsed on his side, his breath shallow, his hand clutched at hishes, as if something had struck him. Bull knelt beside him, and even before he turned the man's face into the light, he knew who it was. Julian Mercer Hastings let out a low whistle. Good Lord, is he? Quo's fingers found a pulse. He is alive, Hastings, butanely, just his voice was tight, Superintendent. Fetch a doctor immediately. Go nodded and stroll off without another word. Poole examined Mercer carefully. There were no wounds, no visible injuries, only a look of pain frozen on his foes. Then Poole's sharp gaze caught some thingles, a small, crumpled piece of paper lying just beside Mara's open hand. Poole took it and unfolded it. Gently, single phrase was scrolled across the page in hurried ink. It was never meant to be discovered. Poole's expression hardened, headed to Hastings's voice, low moaning, "Me, the murderer, is growing reckless in thought. Means the truth is dangerously close." Hastings swallowed. But what truth, Poole? What did Mara find out? Poole stared at the note for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. That, he murmured, is what we must uncover before his killer silences us all. Chapter 13. The Silent Witness. The atmosphere in the manor had shifted, the lingering air over aristocratic. His grace was now stained with fear, as if the very walls whispered oft violence that had taken place within them. Julian Mercer had been taken to his room, unconscious, but alive under the watchful care of the doctor, who had just arrived. Poole stood in the dimly lit drawing room, staring into the fire, as Hastings paced restlessly. "But this is getting out of hand." Poole Hastings, sage voice tight with concern. "First Lady Alina, now Mercer, whoever we're dealing with is desperate." "We Moni," Poole murmured in desperation. "It's like a cornered animal makes one careless. That is where we shall fend our advantage, Superintendent." G entered his expression. Grim doctor says Merca was poisoned. Not fatally, seems. Whoever did it either miscalculated the dose or intended only to incapacitate him. Poole's mustache twitched. How very convenient, a man poised to reveal something critical, only to best strike down before he can speak. Hastings frowned. But why not kill him outright? Surely that would have been safer for the murderer, perhaps. Cool, said thoughtfully, but poison is an intimate weapon. It requires access, and it suggests ascertain. Hesitation. Mercer is not dead because someone did not want to kill him. Buttruther needed to keep him silent. A beat of silence followed. Ku's words. Gold folded his arms. That means Mara knows something dangerous. Pooh turned sharply. Exactly. Monagu, and that is why we must guard him well. But more than that, we must determine what he uncovered before it is too late. Hastings nodded. So where do we begin? Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests, remained seated in uneasy silence with those who had the most. Tolos mon ami, Lady Elena was silenced. And now Mercer has been attacked. There is a common thread, which is single truth linking the acts he turned to. Annabelle, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. Mademoiselle, your sister, Margaret Eschel. Did she ever leave any letters, any writings, anything that might hint at the secret she uncovered? Annabelle hesitated, her hands tightening in her lap. I don't know if she did. They were never sent to me, Vivant. Dio spoke up, her voice smooth yet laced with tension. Miss Poyle, you are suggesting they'd writhing. Lady Lene's murder, Maka's poisoning, is tied to something that happened decades ago. But how can you be certain? Pooh's gaze settled on her, keen and unwavering. Because Mademoiselle's secrets do not vanish with time. They merely wait for the wrong moment to research. Off at that instant, a knock sounded at the door. Uniformed officer stepped inside, hesitating before addressing the superintendent. We've searched Mercer's belongings, as you requested. We found this. He held up a small, aged leather notebook. Pooh's eyes gleamed awe. In ways it hidden Maynard inside the ling of his suitcase. He must have found it treasonably, maybe even today. Pooh extended his hand. Taking the notebook with careful precision, he opened it, his eyes scanning the delicate, faded script. Then her stopped. Hastings leaned forward. What? Is it Pooh? Exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost reverent. It is a journal, Hastings. and it belonged to Margaret Hasham. A stunned silence filled the room. Hastings blinked, then Mercer must have found it while researching Lady Elena Poole nodded, and within these pages I suspect lies the truth that someone has killed to keep hidden. His fingers brushed against the brittle paper. Masami, the past has spoken now. We must listen. Chapter 14. The words of the dead. The fire crackled softly as pewter in the delicate pages of Margaret Shame's journal. The gathered suspects watched in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Hastings, standing at Pooh's shoulder, tried to read over his friend's arm, but found the faded ink difficult to decipher. Pooh's eyes skimmed the lines quickly, his sharp mind absorbing every detail. Then, with a small nod, he closed the journal and looked up. This Masami is what someone has been trying to bury. Vivian Duck crossed her arms. Well, are you going to? Kay, enlighten. SBO Pooh's expression was unreadable and due to Mademoiselle. He tapped the journal lightly. But first, let us consider, why did Julian Mercer have this journal if he had only just found it? How did Heckham to suspect its importance? Cannibal, her face pallid, whispered, did he mention it to anyone before he was poisoned? Superintendent Gold cleared his throat. One of my men spoke with the doctor before Mercer lost consciousness. He muttered something about a hidden name. Hastings frowned. A hidden name, but whose? Puo gave a small smile. Ah, Hastings, that is precisely the question. In PA, he turned back to the journal and reopened it, carefully flipping through fragile pages. Then he stopped at a passage near the end and read aloud. It's promised me forever, but his love was a lie. I was nothing more than a secret to him, something to be discarded when I became inconvenient, and yet I know the truth. He fears what I could reveal, but he should know I have left my words where he will never find them. A chill passed through the room. Hastings inhaled sharply. Good heavens, Margaret Watson's, because she knew something about him. The man she lived. Pooh nodded, and we must ask ourselves, who among us would have feared her revelation the most? Charles Endicott cleared his throat. Pharaoh, this journal is decades old. Whoever Margaret was speaking about may be long dead. Perhaps. Pooh agreed, but not necessarily. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the small, crumpled note that had been found in Mercer's hand after he was poisoned. Holding it up for all to see, he read the words saying, it was never meant to be discovered. Pooh's voice was quiet, but firm. Someone in this room saw Mercer with the journal. Someone feared that he had uncovered the secret name within these pages, and so they tried to silence him. A heavy silence fell over the group. Vivian's voice was cold. And do you know how that someone is? Pooh met her gaze. Not yet, but I will soon. The murderer has left one final thread untied, one mistake they did not account for, and when I pull it, the whole deception will unravel. He carefully placed the journal on the table before him. Tomorrow morning, Miami, I will reveal everything. Hastings blinked. You mean you already know the truth? Poor gave a small, knowing smile. Ignore enough, mon ami, but before I accuse, I must be certain, and for that there is one final test. His gaze swept over the room, lingering on a face. Tomorrow, I shall call you all together, and then the masquerade while in chapter 15, the final thread. The night passed in restless silence. The looming promise of Pooh's revelation, thick and clear. None of the guests slept easily, knowing that by morning the truth would have been exposed at precisely 9 o'clock. Pooh summoned at them to the grand drawing room. The heavy curtains had been drawn back, allowing gray morning light to filter, and the journal of Margaret Asham lay unreadable before him. Beside the cryptic note found in Mercer's grasp, Pooh stood at the head of the room, his sharp eyes scanning each tense face. Hastings and Superintendent G flanked him, the latter standing with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When everyone had taken their seats, Pooh cleared his throat. measure me, the time has come to lift the mask of deception. A nervous rustling spread through the group. Annabel clutched her hands together. Charles Endicott sat stiffly, and Vivendale's lips were pressed into a thin line. Puo gestured toward the journal. Last night, I read the words of Margaret. It's calm. The words that someone has collected keep buried in these pages. She speaks of a great betrothed man who promised her love, but discarded her when she became inconvenient. He lifted the crumpled note, in Julian Mercer, before he was poisoned, muttered something about a hit name. Pooh's mustache twitched. This name, this secret was meant to stay buried, but Mara found it, and so he was silenced. Hastings shifted dubiously. But Puo, what was the secret? Pugh turned the journal to a specific page, then ran his fingers lightly over the text. A small, satisfied smile appeared on his lips. The secret, Hastings, was hidden, not in ink, but in the absence of it. He angled the book so that the light caught a faint indentation on the paper, visible only at a certain angle. Margaret Ashe. Clever woman that she was, wrought something, and then removed it, perhaps in fear that it would be found, but she pressed too hard, and the impression remained. He glanced at Gomer de Yahave. A pencil goo handed him one, and Puo carefully shaded over the faint markings. Slowly, a name emerged. The room collectively held its breath in. Hastings exhaled sharply. Good heavens, the name revealed. In the faded print was Charles Endicott. Murmur of shock spread through the room. Endicott's face remained unreadable, but Pua did not miss the way his fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. Annabel's voice was barely above a whisper. You were the man Margaret loved. Endicott exhaled through his nose, his voice calm. This is absurd. Margaret Ashcombe died decades ago. You're making a great fuss over a forgotten affair. Pooh shook his head. No, Endicott, you misunderstand. It is not the affair that matters. It is the fear of what she knew, the fear that drove you to act when Julian Mercer found this journal. Vivian's eyes widened. You think Charles is poisoned? Mercer. Pooh inclined his head. I do. Mercer's poisoning was not meant to kill it. It was meant to silence a calculated move to buy time. But Monarch Endicott, in your haste, you made an error. Endicott remained, still, his gaze unreadable. And what error would that be? Pooh smiled. You assumed Connor's words would die with her. But words, Muir, have a way of lingering, just like the past itself. A heavy silence fell, then Superintendent G stepped forward. Charles Endicott, I'm afraid I must ask you to come with me for further questioning. For a moment, Endicott simply stared at him. Then with a slow, measured breath, he stood. Very well, he murmured as he moved toward the door. Pua called out softly, one final question, Endicott. Endicott paused, his hand on the doorframe. Did you kill Lady Elena as well? A flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps defiance, crossed an Ott's face. He did not answer. Then, without a word, he stepped through the door. Quouched Hemo, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the other's voice. Quieter now. The masquerade is over. Miami and the past. Last has spoken. Chapter 16. The mask falls. The air was thick with tension as Charles Endicott was led away, but Puel remained still. His hands clasped neatly buried him. The others sat in stunned silence, the weight of revelations settling over them like a heavy fog. Hastings finally broke the quiet. Pooh, you didn't believe that's the end of it, do you? Pooh turned to him with a small knowing smile. No, Moni, the crime is not yet fully unmasked. We have revealed one exception, but the greatest remains. Hastings frowned, but Endicott's name, Watson, the journal, surely that proves his guilt. Pooh sighed. It proves that he had Askrat to hide. But let us consider, why kill Lady Elena? What did she uncover, Annabel? Ashcombe spoke hesitantly. You believe that Charles Endicott did not kill my cousin P.U.O. gave her a solemn look. I believe he had motive. But his actions, following the discovery of the journal, suggest desperation, not control, in Hastings. You should ask yourself, why would a man of his stature use poison when a simpler method would suffice? Hastings blinked. But then, who did? Kill Lady Elena Pooh, turned to Vivian High's expression. Unreadable mademoiselle, you were the first to say that Margaret Tosham's story was from the past, that it could not matter now. And yet, you were also the one most insistent that Julian Mercer was mistaken in his suspicions. Vivian's expression remained calm, but her fingers curled slightly where they rested on the arm of her chair. Poirot continued, Tell me, mademoiselle, why were you so certain Mercer had found nothing unless, of course, you already knew what he was searching for? A hush fell over the room. Fit fondly toned, a soft, mirthless laugh. You're reaching, Poirot. I knew nothing of this wretched journal for last night. Poirot tilted his head, perhaps not its exact whereabouts, but you knew of its existence, did you not? Vivian's silence was telling Pouzagit. You see, Masami, the true murderer was never Charles Endicott. He had secrets. But secrets are not crimes. No, the person who killed Lady Elena was a Mion who feared her discovery would ruin them, not him. His voice softened, but his words were cutting. Vivian, duh. It was you who killed Lady Elena. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Hastings looked utterly stunned at Vivian. But Waipu's gaze did not waver from her because Manami. She is not merely Vivendi. She is also, he tapped the journal, Gentlife, daughter of Margaret. A sham silence. Then Vivian let out a slow breath. Composure she had held onto for so long finally slipping. You're very clever, Miss Puel, she said softly, and I suppose, in the end, there was no escaping you. Annabelle whispered. Margaret's daughter. Vivian nodded once, but her eyes remained on Pooh. My mother never told anyone who my father was, but I always knew she carried the weight of her past, and I inherited it. She exhaled, her voice growing sharper when Mercer started digging into Lady Elena's past. I knew it was only a matter of time before he found the journal, and once he did, she would find out the truth. Poirot nodded. Lady Elena must have uncovered the truth about your parentage, and end with the knowledge that you were the illegitimate daughter of Margaret Ashcombe and Charles Endicott. Vivian smiled bitterly. She wasn't going to expose me, Pooh. She was going to cut me off. Everything, my place in Cecilia into my inheritance, gone in an instant. I had built my entire life on stability, and was going to rip it away because of a secret that should have died years ago. Hastings shook his head. So you killed her? Vivian's eyes were cold. I did what I had to do, Pooh sighed. And yet, Mademoiselle, crime does not erase the past, it only ensures that the truth will always come to light. A moment later, Superintendent she stepped forward. Vivian, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Lady Elena. She didn't resist. As she was led away, she cast one last glance at Puo. You were right about one thing, Mirupo. The past never truly dies. Pooh met her gaze. Mademoiselle, but the truth at least shall live. Epilogue. The curtain falls. The case had been solved, and the shadows that had loomed over the Shamstate were finally lifting. Annabelle Ashcombe sat quietly by the fireplace, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Puo and Hastings stood near Theodore, preparing to leave Hastings' side. She was a remarkable woman. Vivian, intelligent, poised, and yet she let fear drive her to murder. Puo nodded. The greatest tragedies, Nami, are not those caused by hatred, but by desperation. Hastings studied him for a moment. You knew it was her before this morning, didn't you? Pooh smiled slightly. I suspected, but one must never move until all the pieces are in place. As they stepped outside, the morning air walls crisped the estate behind them, quiet once more. Hastings looked back at the grand house. And what now? Puy adjusted his hat, his eyes twinkling now. Mon ami, we return to London, but first, perhaps, a good breakfast. No, Hastings laughed. You know, Puy, after all this, I think you've earned it. Puy nodded satisfied. Indeed, Hastings, the work of the little grey cells is never done. Beethoven. They must rest, and with that, they departed, leaving behind the mystery-oft mask of deception, unraveled at last, just